Good evening. I'm Donna Batchelor, and as a member of Emmanuel Lutheran Church, I welcome you all here tonight. And as a member and board member of VICA, I welcome you to the second program of our winter series. I hope you were all here last week to reflect on the legacy of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and to hear the preaching of Reverend John Walker and the praise music of Brenda and Joyce and Eugene. And I hope you all plan to attend our final program next week, same time, same place, when 4 local religious leaders from 4 very different communities of faith will discuss the sources of hope and resilience in those communities and will help us find the hope and use it to turn mourning into dancing and sackcloth into garments of joy. How great is that? So please plan to join us. Well, that was the past and the future, and now for the present. Here tonight, our program is all about the kids and the pandemic. We have 4 experts here tonight who will share their stories and their strategies of surviving and thriving during these difficult and dangerous times. May I introduce our panel to you? Danielle Vason, Director of Blue Butterfly Family Grief Center. Lindy Chapman, also with Blue Butterfly, and a specialist in supporting children through traumatic experiences. And this is JoAnn Barger, our JoJo, who is also a specialist in surviving and thriving in spite of the COVID-19 virus. And Kimberly Duke, JoAnn's mother and constant companion during this journey through danger and dread, and then back into the sunshine. We are so grateful you are all here to share the ways we can learn to lift up our children and help them to find resilience and foster joy as we journey through this time in the wake of this pandemic.
Thank you so much, Donna, and good evening to everyone. As she said, my name is Danielle Vason, and I am a licensed clinical social worker with Tidewell Hospice. But my real passion and my real job is getting to work with grieving children every day who are grieving the loss of someone that they love. That means that someone that they love has died. Grief counseling for children and families after someone has died. And beyond that, we also provide adult grief counseling. So if you ever find yourself needing grief support after someone you love has died, please reach out to us or anyone you know that volunteers or works at Tidewell. I know we have a few in the audience today. They will connect you with a grief specialist to provide that care for you for free. So we're going to continue to introduce ourselves, and then we're going to get this party started, right? Okay, Lindy.
Hi, everybody. My name is Lindy Chapman, and I'm one of the counselors with Danielle at Blue Butterfly, and I am a certified child life specialist and have been working at Tidewell for about a year and a half now. I help facilitate groups and also provide some individual services to our kiddos.
I'm JoAnn. I am representing the first person in the state of Florida and the United States vaccine. I'm JoAnn's mother, and I was so sad.
Well, so to get us kicked off here, our goal today is really to share the stories of JoAnn and Kimberly. And for us to also share with you some expertise about how we would encourage you to support each other through this pandemic. Not only children, but adults as well. So we will do our very best to make this as relevant as possible. When you came in today, you started by looking at some different colors of paper and you put them into a vase. And we talked about on this paper here, the different types of loss that we've all gone through during this pandemic. We've talked about loss of life. Maybe someone you know has died from COVID-19. Maybe you lost your home, maybe you lost your job, a friendship, financial security, freedom. I know we all lost normalcy. We all are wearing these masks now. So our vision today was to find a way to unite us all with this pandemic. Loss has affected every single one of us in this room, and maybe not because someone we know has died, but because we've lost normalcy, we've lost freedom, we've lost many things, okay? So today, as we present and share with you the stories of these ladies, I hope that you will have some great takeaways. And as you're here with us today, if you have any questions, we will be doing a Q&A at the very end. So if you don't mind holding those till the very end, we will get to those questions. But now we're going to invite JoAnn to share with us her story.
Hello. Okay. So early Sunday morning in December 2019, I woke up and enjoyed a pretty good day with my boyfriend Oliver. We were staying at Universal Studios as a weekend getaway. I had to leave early and go home because I couldn't get out of a shift at the job I held at the time being. That drive home was horrible. I started to feel sick. And I just remember thinking to myself, oh, Jesus, I have to drive 3 hours? That's not going to be good. But I made it home that day, and pretty much from that point on, I was stuck in bed. My symptoms were not of the usual. I had lost my appetite. Other than that, I had fevers, a slight coughs, just things that weren't that quite normal. After about a week of feeling not so good, I started to get really bad fevers. Only a few days following that, basic tasks became very difficult, including showering, going to the bathroom, even brushing my teeth or hair. I couldn't do that by myself at all. And about 2 weeks into that, I couldn't even walk to my bedroom door. I had to have people hold me. I remember my blessing of my mom and my amazing boyfriend helping me do these everyday tasks because my body was too weak to function on its own. It was a time where I was really, really mad at God, and I thought to myself, what could I, a 16-year-old girl, done? I mean, what did I do to deserve this? I didn't quite understand it. And it was really difficult because no matter what me or my mom did, no doctor had an answer for me. I was given millions of answers, but none of them were correct. It was really difficult, and it came to a point where my fever was so high, and the emergency room couldn't do anything other than tell me to take an ice bath. And I kept taking ice baths over and over and over and over again, just so my fever wouldn't get so hot that my blood would boil. I remember that those baths felt like sitting in pins and needles. And I kind of just watched as the world went around me. It really sucked, especially just being a high school student. That's a big impact. I had to stop completely going to school. And I didn't expect to do that. I'm a very social butterfly, so that was a big step. I remember one of those baths, I was sitting in there, and I asked my mom if I could be alone, and she left me. And I just remember sitting there and screaming at God, and I was like, I told myself, you're not real. God is not real. And if you are, I want you to prove it to me. I screamed at God. I said, make me feel better. I'm your child, but you also have to understand that I see my mom, and I'm my mom's child, and she needs me. And I'm a withering away at that point to nothingness. I couldn't control my bowel movements. Just everything went wrong. Anything that could go south did, and we already live in Florida, so it was a really difficult time, and it got worse and worse. They say, or at the beginning they said it was a 14-day time period, and that was just not the case. It was months of everything falling apart, and there was one day that I woke up and I just felt better. It almost felt like Easter morning. I woke up and the sun was shining through the curtains, and for the first time in months, after losing 46 pounds due to not having an appetite, I was starving. I felt like I had never eaten before. I remember my mom being like, why are you walking around getting all worried? On that day, I started to feel better, and weeks going after that, I regathered my strength. But this was a time period of my life where every day I was questioning myself before I went to sleep if I was going to wake up the next morning. And it was very difficult. And yeah, so that's just a little bit of my story. I am very blessed to have the support system that I have. And I definitely feel like there's a lot others who go around, but the time being, I wasn't told anything. I was stressed out. I had no idea. There was doctors telling me I had something called the rhinovirus, which is not anything close to what I had. After the event, the CDC came into play asking questions. And they were shocked that I wasn't staying away from people and all this stuff. My boyfriend had stayed with me and helped me in my home, just do everything. And it was a lot to go through. But I had the support system, and it was great. But I feel like it brought me a lot closer to God, and I feel like He carried me when I couldn't walk for myself, even if I didn't realize it in the beginning. So that's a little bit of my story.
Thank you, JoJo.
Thank you, JoAnn, for sharing that. When you tell that story, what's the hardest part of that journey for you?
Watching the people around me suffer because they didn't know what was going on. They didn't realize it, but I knew it. And just because I was sick, and I didn't want them to feel like they had to care for me, and it really sucked. I was watching my mom not go to work, my boyfriend lose his job, not go to school. We were both in high school at the time. That's pretty hard on two kids. But definitely being social, because I am a social butterfly. I wasn't able to get out there. And even then, there was a point in time where I hadn't spoken for about 4 weeks, a month. I didn't speak because I couldn't use my voice because my body was too weak. So not even being able to speak to my mom as she's taking care of me, I just want to say thank you, I love you, I'm sorry. And I can't. And I just have to watch her tell me that she loves me, and I physically couldn't even use my voice. So I think not being social was, you wouldn't think it, but it really is one of the biggest and hardest takeaways from COVID. Yeah.
JoAnn, what you're describing was so early on for our COVID journey, but many of us experienced that a few months after you, right? Where we were isolated and we were quarantined to our homes and we couldn't even go to Publix, really. So I'm going to ask Lindy now to talk a little bit about how has COVID-19 been affecting children, but how has it been affecting adults, and what is really important here to see the difference developmentally?
So when we think about grief and loss in kids, there really are a lot of people who don't believe that it impacts children that profoundly. There are people who just believe that, oh, well, they're little, they don't understand. I get that a lot. A lot of that they don't understand. And it's simply not true. Children are very, very perceptive little creatures, but the thing is they don't understand in the same way that we do. That doesn't mean that they don't understand something at all. And I think what's important to remember, a big difference between us, aside from our development, obviously we have completed the development and the cognitive and social skills, is children need socialization to help build their development. You know, the concept going around of the kids, I see the jokes on social media sometimes about the kids being the pandemic babies. Oh, they don't know how to act in Target because they're a pandemic baby. There really is a lot of science about that with their development. And, kids need the socialization. They need the interaction. They need to figure out how to cope with things and how to navigate certain situations in the world. And for adults, the things that we worry about and we're impacted by can feel very different. We often look at it and say, like we did with the project up here about, the loss of normalcy, the loss of safety. Some people have lost their homes, some people their jobs, and of course others have lost loved ones as a result of this. And so to have a child maybe come up and say, well, I'm really sad because I can't see my friends at school, to an adult may feel very insignificant. We may look at them and just go, oh, it's not a big deal. You'll see your friends when this is all over. But to them, that's everything. especially to kids who are school age, who are in high school, like JoAnn was just sharing, that is everything. Because the peer support, what's the saying? Like, everything I needed to know, I learned on the playground. The playground is the best teacher in the world. There really is a lot of truth to that. So I think it's important to remember that a lot of things that we view as adults as seemingly insignificant are actually very developmentally significant to children and young people. And there's a lot of things that I think sometimes get kind of looked over with kiddos just simply because they don't feel significant to us.
Thank you. JoAnn, share with us, when you were on this journey, you talked a little bit about not being able to talk to your mom, but what did you notice about your boyfriend and your mom and the toll that this whole thing was taking on them? How was that for you?
Yeah, so just like the jar we have up front today where we put the different colors in, other than the sadness that it took on them, seeing their loved ones sick and suffer as much, like I said, my mom not going to work. She's a single mom, the only one who's ever really taken care of me, so that's a lot to not have the only paycheck coming through the house, not coming through for months on end because you have to take care of your daughter every single day. Not only that, my boyfriend had his own company who he actually had, it was a lawn service company. He ended up selling the company to his friend. He could no longer do it, and that was his basic and main income. It caused a huge debacle in his life. He was not able to go to college because of that. He had to choose a technical school instead. Not only that, just me being out of school and not knowing at the time, the school told me they didn't want me there basically because of how sick I was. But same thing to my boyfriend. He was around me every day. We didn't know that I needed to keep 6 feet away from people. I mean, he was kissing me on the forehead every night to bed. All these things, we had no idea. And it was really interesting. School, work, friendships that were just taken away because you take so much time to focus on one thing and one thing only. Everything else in your life just kind of passes by. And you don't realize when you come back in how much you've missed, and then you do realize, and it kind of sucks. And as simple as that, it sucks, and it can be financially or even just mentally, all different things. But I definitely noticed them all going on or with the people around me, so it was difficult.
JoAnn has talked about the different drains and the different losses that she's had. I'm wondering, Lindy, can you comment on the mental health aspect of this? What is COVID-19 doing to children's mental health and adult mental health?
I would say that the impacts of COVID-19 on mental health are fairly significant. Like I was saying, I think all of us are feeling the impact of not being able to go out and be social in the way that we're needing to, that suddenly screens have become a very, very common part of everyday life. And, for children, screens are, yes, they're wonderful entertainment and there is some educational value with them, but they lose the ability to communicate. They lose the ability to learn how to read body language and to be able to respond to someone when they speak. It's like sometimes it's the misconception of like when a child or a teen texts and then they get another text back and it's like, oh, I didn't mean it that way, because there was the miss of being able to look someone in the eye and learn how to respond to them. So, there's a lot of, like, there have been increases in episodes of depression and anxiety in kids and adults both. I know we have a statistic up there somewhere that actually talks about how much issues with mental health, even increases in substance use and alcohol use to cope with how much of a toll that the lack of socialization, the lack of normalcy, the loss of safety, being able to look around and say, gosh, are we sitting far enough? Are we sitting far enough apart to be safe? That is a loss of a sense of safety. And those things really can impact your mental health. And what I also wanted to say on the back of what JoAnn was saying, I was listening to her and I'm thinking, man, what a long list of secondary losses. And I feel like that is a concept, especially with young people, that gets so overlooked. My favorite example is, a child may have experienced the death of someone significant, seemingly is doing fine And then the weekend comes and they just get really angry and they have an emotional outburst and they struggle because that's maybe the first soccer tournament that daddy's missing him play in. And we just think, oh, it's a soccer tournament. No, to them, it's so much more. And secondary losses can be loss of friendships, loss of going to school, loss of doing the typical things that we should be doing. And that's why we wanted you guys to honor those in this space today. And if you didn't get a chance to do that, we hope you take advantage of that because they all deserve to be honored, that we have all lost something as a result of this pandemic.
Thank you. JoAnn, any last minute comments you have?
I appreciate you listening to the story, and obviously if you came today, you care about the circumstances, so I appreciate that as well. It's good to keep an eye out, and even if something hasn't happened to you or you haven't been affected personally, it's going on around you, and it'd be a shame not to give it a second look.
Absolutely. And now we're going to hear from Kimberly, JoAnn's mother. We want to hear from her perspective. How was this experience for her? What was it like parenting JoAnn during this sickness where you didn't know if your daughter was going to survive?
When my daughter got sick, COVID-19 didn't exist, or at least what we know it to be today. As a parent, any parent in the room knows when your child is sick, you want to fix them. And you will take them to the doctor, you will put a Band-Aid on their knee, and you will do anything in your power to advocate for your child's well-being and for their future. JoAnn has always been a pretty darn healthy kid. She went to Universal with the best thing in the world. It's Christmas break. I'm going to go have fun with my boyfriend and his family. And she certainly had no intent on getting sick of COVID-19, and certainly not of spreading it to both myself and her boyfriend. I think the thing I learned about COVID-19 when we figured out what it was is how scary it truly was, because I was fine. I had COVID-19 and was fine. And so did Oliver. And I don't know if you go into mama mode where you don't even know that you're not feeling well, but you do all these different things. Doctors upon doctors upon doctors telling me it's something called the rhinovirus. You Google rhinovirus, it doesn't exist. I remember the first urgent care visit, the gentleman said, oh, it's some terrible sickness, maybe 14 to 21 days, she'll be fine. It's like the flu, take her home. She has 103.7 fever. I'm not taking my child home without an answer. And it was that constant thing. Urgent care, emergency room, try a different urgent care, maybe somebody else. There was no answer, nothing. I was mad, right? I was so mad. Like, how do you not have an answer? Take more blood, figure it out. There's got to be something wrong with my child. And that's painful. It wasn't cancer. It wasn't anything you could just imagine. So that morning, when she felt like Easter morning, that night before, I had a real long conversation with God. And I remember I called my parents and I said, Mom and Dad, I'm pretty sure JoAnn's not going to make it through the night. And there's nothing I can do. But I am broken. And I got off that phone with my parents and I got on a direct line with God. And I was like, you may not do this. I've been a single mom. I raised this kid. We were partners in crime. We were best friends. We were advocates for each other. And I didn't know where else to turn. The school was like, where's your kid? What's going on? And I'm like, she's sick. I had a truancy officer. I'm not keeping my kid out of school. She's not ditching school. And constantly advocating, like, no, I said, come on over. You want to take her temperature? You go ahead. I'm not making this up. But they didn't like the letter from the doctors that it was a virus, because at the time nobody could believe that a virus could last that long. It was day 28 of fevers, and day 29 is her Easter morning. And then I remember having to pick up the pieces. I think she remembers part of the gruesome part of having the mom have to change her diaper at 16, all of these different things. That part doesn't stick out. It was the afterpiece. I was out of work for quite some time. I had to work my butt off, and as much as I didn't love my 16-year-old daughter having a boyfriend, I couldn't have done it without him. And I know that he sacrificed a lot. I know that everyone in this community, world, globally, has sacrificed a lot. Her doctor, she was just healthy, and it was March 11th, and COVID was really starting to be talked about. And I will never forget the call from her doctor. And she said, I guarantee that is what your child has. As soon as there's an antibodies test, we are going to find out. That woman, she probably has no idea, but I leaned on her through that journey. And it was a tough journey. It's amazing how well your brain can just shut off some of those dark moments when you love somebody so much, such as your own child. But it was the picking up of the pieces that became difficult. I saw a child sink into deep depression. She had lost more weight than she's not a very big young lady. She didn't have that much weight to lose, but when you lose over 40 pounds, I mean, she was gaunt. It was scary. She's put on some of that weight. I'm very thankful. But it's been a journey. It's been a big journey. I think for me, we found a therapist for her. God bless her and that woman in JoAnn's life, because as Lindy spoke about these secondary losses, I as a mother was picking up all of my immediate losses to keep and not lose a household, to keep my finances going, to make sure that she had everything she needed and can continue on a healthy track, that it was, okay, now she's healthy. I've got to scramble to make up for lost time. And as I was scrambling myself, I forgot about all of that time. I didn't forget about it, but I didn't recognize it. You know, she was a junior in high school. That's the most important year in high school. You know, you look forward to the blow-off class's senior year. She missed 2.5 months of school. Do you have any idea how hard that is to make up? And it's like, come on, JoAnn, do your homework. Come on, I know you've got a lot of stuff to do. You got to, and that's me as a mama trying to get her back on track. I didn't recognize, and I could see her slipping further into this depression, and I didn't know other than to reach out and find somebody that could help her, and that was a huge blessing. She and her therapist are still very good friends today, and that's huge. But I didn't even have the concept of a secondary loss. Truly, I didn't. Finally, oh my gosh, she's healthy. She's not going to die. We're going to feed her. We're going to get weight put on. But it became very difficult at school. And she can tell you, she finally, after lockdown was over, went back to school her senior year. And go ahead, share. Didn't get to finish this year.
So, going back to school once COVID was around and everybody was now worried about it, the schools that were still open and things, I know there are some that shut down, 75% of the school went virtual, and so many kids went virtuals that they literally had to stop that and say, no more kids can go virtual. We need kids in the classroom. And I still had waited before I had come back to school. Finally, I come back, and the school, I was coming home sick every single day in hives. I had no idea why. No idea why. I've never really had allergic reactions like that in my life, but it was an everyday thing. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, what is this symptom? What's going to happen to me next? After weeks of thinking it was the granola bars my mom had decided to buy new, I finally found out that it was the chemicals my school was using to get rid of COVID-19. They were basically, if you've ever seen people who take care of bees, they use foggers to put them to sleep. That's basically what the device would look like, and they would do it on everything: computers, desks, chairs, all the way down to pencils, teachers' desks. Everything I would touch would make me break out in hives. So after missing months and months of school, I go back to school and I can't even be at school because I'm itching 24/7. And then the school board says that they can't do anything about switching the chemicals because it's the most cost efficient for the county. And so then I had to switch to online school completely, and I was locked out of being social again. And it was really hard. I do lots of things like that, so definitely was a little bit of a setback.
It was. And as a parent, you hope and dream that your kid gets to go to prom, that they get to go to Friday night lights football games, and do all these wonderful things that you got to do your senior year. And she was no longer, again, something else taken away. And it was really, really hard. And then I saw this little beautiful woman come alive. Sorry. I thought what I went through watching her was hard. I learned that what she went through was probably harder. And the beauty is she came out on the other side with joy, love, integrity, and excitement to go into the world. She not only lost her senior year, she lost her gap year. She was planning on going to Slovakia to work at the Bible college there. She didn't get to do her gap year. She had all these big plans for life, and just like every single one of us in this room, they've taken away from us. And it's really no different. I mean, we all suffered such great losses. And I'm sitting in my office working away. This wasn't that long ago. JoAnn comes marching upstairs and comes in my office and sit down, and she's like, I got a plan. And I'm like, okie dokie. What is that going to be? She's like, well, since I can't go to college and I can't do this and I can't do that because we were planning this and everything keeps changing, I have decided and I have enrolled in the Paul Mitchell School of Cosmetology. And I was like, really? Okay, JoAnn. So her senior year, the most fun she had was in her virtual blow-off class, theatrical makeup at Venice High. And she excelled in it greatly. She was amazing at it. She'd come out, sometimes I go, whoa. And she'd be creating characters in things. And it was a life skill she found out she loved and enjoyed doing. And, you know, this kid who just felt like, and as a mom, watched so many things be taken away from her, was like she found something that could bring her back joy. And so she did it all by herself. I couldn't have been more proud. I was shocked, but I couldn't have been more proud. You know, and now she has her first apartment in Fort Myers. She starts school in 2 weeks and is taking on the world again. And that's enormous. Yeah.
You know, that is certainly something to celebrate. The grief journey that you're describing, Kimberly, I'm just sitting here thinking about how grief is so different for everyone, right? Grief is the feelings we have when we lose something. And most of us think of grief as the loss of someone we love to death, right? But everything they described is grief. That journey of ups and downs, that roller coaster that we know grief to be, and then to find joy at the end, to push through and get to moving forward, to get to a place where you're like, first of all, I'm still alive. I fought. Second of all, I have a plan, I have a purpose, and we're in the church, so I can say the Lord carried you, as you said, when you couldn't walk.
And I do truly believe that.
Amen.
And Kimberly, as you shared, you had to advocate for your daughter, but your daughter advocated for herself as well.
Yeah, she did. I was really proud. There were many things that she did. I think asking for help is huge. I don't think I could have had that kind of courage at her age to do that same thing. She knew she needed help. She knew she was kind of feeling that way. And so she did. She took it upon herself to work with a school. 2 months is a whole quarter, basically. She missed a whole quarter of school. JoAnn was actually in dire straits of not going to be able to graduate high school. And so she had to advocate for herself with the school. She's a very smart kid, but when you miss that much time, you still have to make it all up. Well, but you still have to keep going with all those other assignments. There just was no time. And while JoAnn didn't have a fever and all of these things, the afterline effect, I don't know if you guys have heard of the symptom COVID brain, right? The cloudiness. It was for months. Honest to goodness, it was for months. I'd be like, I swear we just talked about this. But she had those things, and so it was like, I felt bad. She had to work triple hard, and she had already struggled a little bit here and there, and so it was like extra work. And so she did. She had Miss Stodart was an advocate for her at the school, and she leaned on her, and together they figured out a program that would work for her to get her to be able to graduate on time with her peers. She lost proms, dances, all these things, but she wasn't going to miss walking at Venice High.
I made it 11 minutes before
This is a true story.
you. If you don't know this, after the actual last day of school, you have about a 2 to 3 day grace period before you walk across that stage. Online school was very difficult for me. It sucked because every other student who was there from the beginning got this presentation on how our classes are going to work and all that. But I was already missing 2 months of school, and I missed that presentation. So the website was thrown at me, and I looked at it like, huh? So finally, my very last assignment, 11 minutes, and thank God we live on the island. I went to Venice High School here. Thank God we lived on the island. I jumped in my car so fast. I drove to the high school, probably speeding. I walked into my counselor's office, and I said, I did it, and I'm going to walk across that stage. She looked at me. She didn't even say a word. Typing. 10 minutes later, she looks back at me. You did it, Missy. Go ahead and walk across that stage.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
Yeah. So, yeah.
And it was all worth it.
Yes, it was.
Thank you guys both for sharing so much of your story. To close up, we're going to open it up for Q&A, but Lindy is going to share a little bit. We want to leave you with some information about grief and symptoms of grief, because some people don't even know that there are symptoms of grief, right?
Yeah.
We all are grieving all those different colors and things that we put into that vase today. So Lindy's going to share a little bit about some of the symptoms, and then what can you do to help find joy during this pandemic?
So when we talk about grief, I think what kind of gets lumped into the biggest thing is just feeling sad. We feel sad. True, but grief is so much more robust than that. And it is so much more complicated than that. And grief is not linear. You know, many of us are very familiar with the 5 stages of grief. We were taught about that. And a graphic that I saw at one point in a training conference, you know, they said what we really want to show that grief looks like. And it looked like a child had drawn it. It was just this big, messy scribble on the paper. And I was like, that is more appropriate. That is more appropriate, because we don't just feel a feeling for a period of time and then check it off and go, well, did that one, and then move on to another. Grief can pop up at different times for unexpected reasons, And it can do that in kids and adults. But what I typically tell them between kids and adults is the only thing that is the same is the emotions. Kids can feel some really complicated stuff. They feel frustration, they feel worry, they feel loneliness, all of that stuff. And all of that is part of grief, frustration, even happiness, relief, worry, all of those feelings, like I tell kids all the time, they have room to move. They're not meant to stay still. They're not meant to stay cooped up within us. And that's the same for kids and adults. But what happens is kids manifest them differently than we do. Okay. So for adults, if we're having a time of grief, ideally, we have a skill set in our head. Okay, what is going to help me as I'm processing this feeling? Okay, I'm going to cry, and then maybe I'm going to take a bubble bath. I'm going to call my friend. I'm going to go for a walk. I'm going to listen to some music. And you kind of have a list of what we call coping skills, right? A list of things that we do that bring a level of comfort and relief to us, and also facilitate our processing at the same time. Kids don't necessarily come with that. We all know the phrase, kids are resilient, right? Oh, it's okay. Kids are resilient. They can handle it. They're resilient. I got a little bit of an inner conflict with that, because just because kids are resilient doesn't mean that we don't teach them how to move forward. It doesn't mean that we just let yucky things happen to them and then don't teach them what to do when they're struggling. They're resilient when we help them become that. They're just not naturally that way. So when you look at kids who are grieving, whether it is a human being, missing a prom, missing a soccer tournament, anything, you're going to see some things that are different. One of the first things, regression. A lot of times we limit that to the babies, right? The baby's regressing. They've started bedwetting again. That can happen all the way up to adolescence. But just how it presents might look a bit different. Okay, so yes, while you may have the small child that wets the bed, you may have a teen who regresses and suddenly just not doing some of the same skills that they know how to do. Suddenly they're asking an adult for help with things that it's like, really? You know how to do that? Like, what's going on? So regression can look very different. Emotional outbursts are very common and can happen all the way up to adolescence. When I tell families, context matters with kids, because a lot of times they can't necessarily connect. I'm really feeling I'm having a grief episode, and that's why I lashed out at my sister. So I'm like, you have to look at what's happening around the outburst. A lack of interest in the same activities. I spoke to a family just today that one of their daughters, who's close to JoAnn's age, she had all these ambitions in the world to go to college and play soccer. She was going to be on a soccer scholarship. Then the loss of her special person occurred, and now she doesn't want to do that anymore. She's completely abandoned something that was a lifelong investment and ambition. She does not even want to barely play soccer again. Okay, that's a grief symptom. That we're not wanting to do the same things. Changes in sleep, eating. I tell people kids technically have control of about 4 things in their day-to-day life. When they eat, when they sleep, when they go to the bathroom, and when they talk. That's pretty much all they got, right? Because otherwise, they've got to talk to an old stinky grown-up, okay? But those are 4 things that they can control. So those are 4 areas that I always tell people to look at when you want to know, because they can decide. So we'll see kids who eat more, eat less. Suddenly they have flashbacks. Maybe they're going to crawl back in the bed with their grown-up to sleep at night. They're becoming more clingy. Maybe they refuse to talk about it. Maybe they talk about it all the time. So those are the type things that we look for in kids that are typically very different from adults. And of course, there's a few more, but, I want to be sensitive with time. So how do we help them become resilient? We can't just look at them and go, be resilient. It doesn't quite work like that. I've tried. It doesn't work. So I'm writing myself out to my director, but it's fine. So, we teach them, like I said, we teach them the coping skills. And kids a lot of times confuse coping with distraction. I cannot tell you, children will look at me and go, well, I just watch anime all the time and that helps me feel better.
Or I just like to sleep.
I like to say, oh my gosh.
Sleeping is my coping skill.
No, you're not coping, you're avoiding. So there has to be some education with that. They want to drown themselves in video games, anime, because they're avoiding the work. In their defense, does it allow them to forget? Sure. But that doesn't relieve it. Because when they turn off the video game, when they wake up, they have to get off YouTube at some point, right? The feelings are still there. And it feels scary. A lot of my kids love to do what I call the overprogram. It's very natural for kids to have interest, right? Maybe 1 week it's tennis, and then 6 months later it's theater, and then 6 months after that it's something else. When kids are overprogramming, it's, I want to try tennis and soccer and basketball and theater, and then in my spare time, I think I want to be a cheerleader. Whoa, dude. No. Because they have figured out that it feels better to be busy and not think about the hard stuff than it is to allow themselves to sink into that place and do the work. But here's the thing. Grief is going to show up at one point or another. You either deal with it now or you deal with it later.
And our favorite thing that we've been really harping on lately with our kids and families is that coping skills are a choice.
Yes.
We know coping skills. You could list 10 to me right now, but are we using them?
Right.
Are you taking that walk? Are you taking that bubble bath? Are you calling that friend? Are you cooking, baking, whatever it is that brings you joy, peace, and calm? Or are you, I'll do that tomorrow. Oh, I'll watch TV. Oh, I'll sleep. Oh, I'll do bills. Things that do not bring you joy, calm, and happiness. But we know what they are, but we're not choosing to use them. And why is that?
A lot of times it's an issue of self-esteem. There are plenty of children who actually believe that they don't have a right to feel better. Many times if kids don't have a full and robust understanding of how someone significant to them has died, they make up a narrative that works for them. Even if they do know how they died, then it may still be but there's still a part of it that I could have controlled. That it's my fault. And if you don't believe that you deserve to feel better, you're not going to make a choice to feel better. And that's true of adults and kids. And so that's one of the things that we kind of stumbled into in one of our talks was just like, you know what, at the end of the day, we can tell people coping skills all day long. But when you're in that emotional space, you have a choice. And that's what they are. You have to decide and have the self-esteem and want to sit there and say, hey, I want to go to a therapist because I want to feel better, but also I deserve to feel better than this. And it's helping kids realize that, helping pour into their self-esteem, doing things that make them kind of sit up a little bit straighter. And a lot of that is, it's not just necessarily pouring the positive into their cup, but it's also empowering them to handle situations. That also builds confidence just as much as the words. But it's like, I know you can cope with this. I know you can handle this. Here are some suggestions. Here are some things that have maybe worked for me, because when kids are grieving, most of the times they have no clue what to do. So who do they look at? They look at us. They look at us for what to do. So if we want them to cope well, we have to show them how to cope well and show them that it can be effective.
And just to close, finding joy during this pandemic has been hard. I know it has been hard for us. Our program has significantly changed, life as we know it in support groups, which you very commonly want to do in person, right? And you commonly want to hug and support each other, put your arm around someone. That has gone out the window. We have to wear masks and face shields between children and ourselves. And that's scary, especially when you're working with kids who are already traumatized, who are already terrified, who already have no interest in coming to a place where they have to talk about their dead loved one. And then we add masks and social distancing and isolation and 6 feet apart. And how fun is that, right? So when you think about trying to find joy back in our lives and in children's lives, I think it just starts at validating. You've said it. This sucks. It does. None of this is fun. And I think we have to validate that, especially with kids, because they have to know that we know this is not ideal. I know you don't like wearing your mask, but mommy has to wear it too. And we're doing that so we can be safe.
And they need to know they're not alone. That's the other big thing, that they are not the only little individual in this world walking around with the big feelings that they're having. So that also
And
helps.
all feelings are okay.
They are welcome and they have room to move. They are not meant to stay still in our bodies. Can y'all tell us say this 47 times a week?
And if you think otherwise, Lindy will do the wiggle jiggle dance to show
I
you.
sure as heck will. It is not cute, but I'll do it.
So I hope that we've enlightened you a little bit about our feelings of loss during COVID-19. You know, when we were prepping this, we felt like we wanted people to understand that we're all in this together. We all see you. You see us, right? We have to support people like JoAnn and Kimberly. There's no way we can believe that this pandemic isn't affecting each other. It affects our day to day. It affects the way we shop, the way we go to the store, the way we drive. I see people driving with their masks on. So it affects every aspect of our lives, and it is important that we honor that and validate that. And with that, we will open it up for Q&A from you all, if you have any for us. Donna is going to come a little bit closer to you so she can repeat your question for the crowd.
Hello, hello.
Does the young lady feel she's really finished with COVID now, the physical aspects?
Thank you. Jojo, this is for you. Do you feel like you're finished with COVID? Is it over for you, or are you still holding on to some of that?
No, I don't think it'll ever truly be over. I mean, I'll be 90-year-old telling my kid about how it affected my prom and all of that. But I think there's still a lot, like we said, secondary losses actually go on a lot further because your immediate losses can end just like that. I can wake up feeling fine. But those secondary losses, I feel like definitely drag out. Even then, when I was wanting to apply to Paul Mitchell, I kind of had to explain some things to my school. Why I had missed so much school and try and kind of prove myself, like, no, I promise I'll be in school. I won't ditch. I was just sick. So it definitely does drag on, and there will most likely be problems. I mean, even applying for jobs in the future. Why did you lose that job that you have for that long? COVID, because I got sick. And that's the only answer I'll be able to give. So I feel like it doesn't ever really end, sadly.
I'm just wondering, as an adult for myself, is this sense of the world is changing and may never get back to the way it was. I'm wondering if kids have that global sense.
That's an excellent question. As adults, we know how much the world has changed because of this virus. How do kids deal? How does someone like you think about that?
So most kids are very active within social media, and I would almost guarantee you that kids have a worse outlook on COVID than adults, mostly because it's social media. They're putting anything bad or negative they can say out there for everybody to see. And you have young minds who are so influenced by everything that's going on social media. I mean, they'll believe anything they read. And so that presence being online, I feel like actually scares kids. And I mean, they're looking at this and they're thinking, oh my gosh, this is so scary because whatever reason. And I feel like that's not a good thing, but most of the time it's adults and everything else that are overlooking this. They don't realize that kids are feeling a lot more scared because when the adults are scared, that says something. It does. And so, yeah.
Can I say, too, I noticed when JoAnn was able to have peers back in her home, I was almost, I don't know what the right word, I was so taken back how many of her peers were like, in the beginning, it's nothing. We don't need to wear masks. Sorry, you're coming in my home. At this point, there was not a vaccine. And yeah, this is the way of the world today. And so I think it has evolved from that. But in the very beginning, I looked at some of her peers and I guess you're not welcome back in my home. because it was very, very, very real for us. And I do think that social media, JoAnn chooses to be off of social media, which is fine, but because it was toxic and she had to hear those stories in the beginning that this was not real, and she could tell you a very different story. And so I find that interesting.
Just to add on a little bit, we had talked about this before, but one thing that really sits in my mind is these pandemic babies and these children who are being born after COVID has presented itself to the world. My question is my child going to think that their face is a private part because they have to wear a mask 24/7 because other people refuse to believe it's a real thing? And I mean, when people don't believe, is it ever really going to go away? And so that's definitely, I think, a thing to think about. The little kids, they might not understand a lot, but they're going to understand a mask being on their mouth every single day means it's not a good thing. So just a little thought.
You had a question?
I've been concerned about schools being open during the pandemic. And there are those who say, oh, children really have to be in school for their mental health and for their ability to learn face to face. On the other hand, we know that if people are in that close proximity, and children are not very good about maintaining distances, and as you said, JoAnn, everything has to be cleaned and it's not particularly safe. And what do you think is the best way to proceed?
Yeah, if I could just repeat that for our streaming and who weren't able to hear you, viewers at home. How are schools finding that balance between keeping kids safe and making things, getting back to what we consider normal? Do you think that's
I would say, please add, is it the right thing to do to go back, for everyone to be back in school together, or is the lesser of the two evils to be learning virtually so that?
Yes, we all talked about and listened to that. It's absolutely essential socialization. So once again, it's a question of finding balance between mental health and physical health, and not only socially but academically. You know, we have a route that we have to take. So that's, I guess, I don't know how you all would answer that since you're not political
If I
leaders
may,
or local.
this quote just came up on the screen, which is the perfect one, although it's about adults. 53% of adults in the U.S. reported that their mental health has been negatively impacted due to worry and stress over COVID. Now, apply that to children. Apply that to children and think about the worry and stress that it has on our little friends and how it affects them in their day to day.
Yeah, no, it really does affect. But to answer your question, in the beginning, most of the counties had control over what was going on within the school boards. It wasn't one big decision made by the United States. Every county could choose. However, I do believe my school did it better than most. So we were told 75% of our students could leave and be virtual schooled. The parent was allowed to make that decision. And I honestly feel like that's the best way. So that brings 75% of the students out of the school, right? Allowing that other 25% not to be in such close proximity, to have more space between individuals and things like that. But I think it was a good thing that the parents were allowed to choose who left and who didn't, if their child stayed or left. Mostly because a lot of the times in high school, the parent's going to look at the kid and ask the kid, maybe not so much in elementary school because they're still making those decisions and things. But because of my situation and the chemicals in school, I had to do online. And in the beginning, it was really, really difficult for me. But as soon as I figured it out, how the system worked and everything else, compared to when I was in school every day normally, my grades went up so much because online I actually found out in the long run was good for me. So I believe that's why I believe that's why schools should allow the students to choose who leaves and who stays, because some people will go to school and they need that interaction. They need to see it in their face and all of that stuff. For me, I learn by reading. So I can read through an entire textbooks on the computer and be like, okay, I understand that. I can write a whole essay now. Some students aren't like that. Some need to talk to the teacher. So I definitely feel like my school did it the best way. However, I'm not a doctor, so I couldn't tell you if it's the best decision out there to be in school still. But for the mental health, I definitely think it's the best decision to keep your kids in school. Even if they don't like school, they'll appreciate being there.
I think it's interesting that she says that. My sister has two little guys, and well, they're 8 and 6 now, but they were younger. And so they were out of school, and she kept them virtual. She chose to keep them virtual in, I guess, this past school year, I guess, is when we first went back. But she was failing as a parent to teach them because of their development needs. And so yeah, I don't think that there's a right answer. I don't know that there's a good answer from a doctor, a good answer from a parent, a good answer politically. I think this is still, no matter, everyone thinks we're on the end of all of this, this is still a time when we are a little bit of trial and error on the side of goodness for the better of everyone else in the world. And so when you look at it from that piece, in the beginning, JoAnn struggled very much learning virtually, but it was those secondary losses she was still dealing with that she wasn't. And then it was, it kind of came together. I don't think that there's a right answer there. Unfortunately, I wish there was an easy button, but we're not there yet.
So I just want to say that as a child, I had 3 months in quarantine. And then another year, I had 2 months because my father was a milkman and I had scarlet fever for 3 months.
Wow.
And our cousin who slept with my sister and I in the same bed got polio. And then she was in the iron lung. So when COVID came right here in Venice, I had anxiety for the whole 6
Absolutely.
weeks first until
I can't even imagine.
Yes, let me just share with our online viewers. You are an expert in isolation between scarlet fever and polio. And so this was this harder or easier, or as an adult, were you able to process it?
I was, but not for 6 weeks. For those weeks, I was very anxious. I was grumpy. I was not myself. I couldn't figure out how come I couldn't deal with it as a grown-up. And I'm not even in my 70s. I'm 80. And I could not figure out until I realized that I was having flashback feelings. Mm-hmm. So I had to figure it out, and I did that, and that was wonderful for me. I wrote a haiku poem every day. I went walking. I thought about getting a dog so that I'd have a reason to go out, but I didn't.
Good thinking, though. Good thinking.
And I had the skills once I understood what I was experiencing was flashback. And I'm so grateful that children and young people can learn this and have those understandings that back in the day, no one talked about for us.
Yeah.
And
Here's a resource right here, right?
And what you're describing, the haiku, the walks, those are all coping skills that you found a way to process what was going on in your head and in your heart to get it out and make sense of it. So bravo for that.
Yeah.
I just want to know how you went from your dark place of being angry with God. How did you get from there to through that? What helped you?
Well, to me, it really was like a miracle. because, like I was saying, I asked my mom to be alone in that bath, and I had taken a couple hundred just like it to cool down my body temperature. And I think it was the most time in my life where I felt abandoned by God completely and didn't believe anybody was listening to my prayers. But when you can go from losing 46 pounds and having 103.6 degree fever for months on end, not eating, not controlling your bowel movements, not even walking to your bedroom door or speaking to your mom, and you can do that almost all in one day, the day after you yell at God, it truly just does feel like a miracle. And there's really no other answer I could give you other than that. After I became really involved with the youth group here at Emmanuel, and little kids might be forced to go to Sunday school, but they have a lot to say about the Lord. And actually listening to little kids and being around them every day after that, it was one of the first things that I put back into my routine. Made my heart happy, made my heart fill with joy. And those little kids kind of reminded me that I'm Christian and that's who I've always been and who I want to be. And that I want to show people that even no matter what in their darkest times, and they can't walk for themselves, God will carry them. And when I saw these little kids just running around having so much fun with the Lord's name in their heart, I think that's what brought me back to Him.
Thank you so much. Your informative and very inspiring message this evening. We were all made more mindful of the way COVID and other life-threatening diseases affect our children, and yes, all of us. Micah is so pleased you came out on this very cold Venice evening. Don't forget to join us next Monday on our final program, same time, same place, to hear from 4 religious leaders representing 4 different communities of faith. They will share with us sources of hope and resilience. Before we leave, I invite you to pray in your faith as I pray in mine. Creator of the universe, we pray for all who are suffering and bereaved at this time of sorrow, incomprehension, tragedy. We all stand together. In this crisis, we pray for God's mercy and healing for the sick, and for health and strength for all who care for them. We ask that you guide people in their new realities and provide for those who need it. Allow struggling people to give themselves permission to find help. Prompt worn-out parents to speak words of kindness and encouragement to their children. Help children, youth, and adults find creative ways to talk with loved ones about their fears and anxieties. Amen.
Amen.
Safe home and peace to all.